computer. Okay, and then I go back to screen sharing. Or we'll just introduce everybody to start with. So, hello everybody. This is, I'm so badly prepared for this because it has been such a really, really busy week, but it's all going to be fine. We have outside, so I'm sure that you've seen, we have our exhibition, Empty Columns Are a Place to Dream. And back in, I can't remember when it was, Rick, I like completely chanced my arm. I decided that it would be really cool to do a collage exhibition for Vintage Week because it has that sort of vintage aesthetic and that it would be a good fit. But I wanted it to be a collage exhibition with meaning. So I just started Googling people that are involved in collage. I came across Rick, who's like king of collage in New Orleans, that runs a magazine and has workshops and is at the moment doing you have to correct me if I get it wrong, curatorial fellowship with the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Arts. And I emailed Rick and said, we're this little town in the middle of Ireland, and I'd like to do a collage exhibition, and we have an empty pillar. And I think that in these times, it would be a really, really great subject to use. And Rick got back to me immediately and said, oh, hey, we have an empty pillar in New Orleans as well that used to have General Lee on it, that was removed it was removed in the 70s?
No, it was removed like 2 years ago.
About 2 years ago, General Lee went. So Rick wrote out this huge long essay about this project and assembled an amazing array of artists from around the world. So we have Inez, who's actually in San Francisco, but is around San Francisco. Danielle, you're in Canada?
Yes, I'm in Canada.
Eliana, where are you? Are you?
Sorry, I'm based in Iran currently, so Iran.
And Ashley, you're in Toledo?
Right. Actually, I'm in a village called Swanton, pretty much in a cow pasture. So hi.
And Rick himself, are you in New Orleans at the moment?
No, I'm in Montreal.
And Mark, are you in Birmingham?
Yeah, that's correct. Birmingham, England.
So I'm going to try and do my screen share because I have some images that we can. So we're recording and we're screen sharing. So this exhibition, and it's a little bit messy, but I just couldn't work out how to get it looking really tidy. Empty Columns Are a Place to Dream. Based on, the start of this was each artist they got the photograph with the Duke of Cumberland removed, and this was the starting point for the collages. And it was to think about do you want to explain it, Rick?
Happy to.
Yes, you do some explaining.
I mean, the monument in the United States, we have been wrestling with monuments pretty deeply for the last 10 years because there have been so many that were erected after slavery, after the end of slavery, but ultimately as a message to people of color and to Black people in particular to remember their place. And, when I looked into the history of the Cumberland column and learned about the Duke of Cumberland and thought about why they might want to put the Duke of Cumberland in the middle of this town, it seemed to me that the British were sending a message to the Irish to remember their place. And I felt immediately a certain amount of solidarity with that. I also thought it was incredibly cheeky how the statue was removed because the town removed it in 1915, and Brian, please correct me if I get a date wrong, for conservation reasons was the official reason. But you couldn't help but recognize that this was also a time in a period of the rise of republicanism and the rise of kind of Irish consciousness. And I imagined the town leaders of Birr using the excuse of conservation to remove something that ultimately should have never been there in the first place. And I found that it really tickled my funny bone a little bit. Also, I don't believe the actual statue is in one place anymore, that they not only removed it, but parts of it are scattered around, or it doesn't exist entirely in one place anymore. Is that correct?
His head.
Yeah.
Where is his head? Is that in the
Museum.
Where is it?
Hunt Museum in Limerick.
His head's in Limerick in the museum.
Well, there you go. But my thought about this was that, and just in thinking about monuments in general, is that, you know, for much of history has been told through and about the eyes and voices and actions of great men. And the great man history leaves out a lot of us, and it leaves out a lot of us who aren't men, who aren't holding power, who aren't necessarily captains of industry and generals of war. And we're moving into a time where we understand history as about communities of people and how people live and how they relate to each other. And in doing that, we open history to understanding the experiences and lives of women, of children, of people who were marginalized, people who didn't get to sit on a throne or command a battlefield. And I think that is a more compelling history because, frankly, for me, that is a more compelling future. And I want to live a world where everybody matters. And so moving away from monuments to people and moving towards monuments to ideas was very exciting to me. And I was very interested to see what a group of collage artists coming from different corners of the world with different experiences would come up with as a kind of dream of what could embody the top of this column in the middle of Birr. And I wanted us to do this because ultimately, and I hope we get there today somehow, I'm really curious what the people of Birr want on the top of that column, because we've all kind of come into your town and said, hey, we think this is a great idea, but ultimately you have to live with it. And I'm very curious what registers, what doesn't register, and what folks think. So that was the idea behind the exhibition.
Thank you, Rick. So here, for this exhibition, we have 3 of our artists. Marta Janik has come over from Poland and has today done some amazing workshops in the Dome, and more workshops tomorrow. We have Anthony from Mayo. So this is Marta's piece here. And Anthony Kelly has come up from Mayo. It's his piece in the middle. And then Lynn, who's sitting at the front here, has made this piece here. And I just wondered if each artist would like to just talk a little bit about their pieces very quickly. Yeah?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so do you want to say something, Anthony?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if I should stand up or what I should do here, but I should be more natural maybe. So, yeah, this in the middle is my piece that is a monument to dreaming together, imagination and a lot of maybe pushing towards the edges of what is already to discover something new. So I guess in my piece really I was thinking about dreaming in a broader sense, not just the sense of what happens when we fall asleep, but what happens when we're being creative, or what happens when we are considering things, or how we respond internally when we listen to music and the images that evokes. You know, this real searching that kind of occurs naturally for all of us. And I think that that is just a universal human trait, right? And I think that that's something that is really beautiful, and I think it's something that we do together, right? So I was really thinking then about monuments and polarization and how we're all separate, and we have these kind of pigeonholed sort of opinions, and you know, there's a lot of that energy in society now. But underneath all of that, we're something else, right? We have a really shared experience. And I think bringing together, for me anyway, is kind of an aspect or a way of recognizing that and just maybe accessing something that can unify us again. So, yeah, that's me.
So this is Marta's beautiful tree here.
And I thought that instead of the column, I would rather see a tree. And tree is considered in many cultures as the center of the world. And in my culture, inside me, too. I love trees, and I think that they play important parts in our lives, and they have practical role and they have magic role. We all sat under the tree. We all enjoy shadow of the trees, and we breathe because we have trees. So yeah, I put an oak tree in the middle of the world, actually, and I put some birds which live in Ireland, like robin, like blackbird, like blue-tip. I used plants I remembered from the past. We need to find new metaphors. We need to find new language to describe climate change, for example. So that's where I was when I created these.
And tomorrow, Marta's going to plant an oak tree in the castle.
Yes, and that is more than I could imagine. That's the best. I can die afterwards.
And then, I'll just move this over a minute, and we see Lynn, if we know. Lynn is our local Cadham's town down the road. Do you want to just come and sit on stage at the front?
No, quite a lot of it's chopped off there. I hope it's not
No,
chopped off
just
on the real
that
thing, is
is
it?
No, I don't know. It's not enough.
Caroline kindly rang me up earlier this year and invited me to contribute to this, you see, and I said, well, but the main thing, the very first thing I wanted to do was address all these heads and shoulders that are just everywhere these days. It absolutely drives me out, not being a computer person and having a dreadful television. So I thought, well, we'd have a row of figures, and then we'd have laptops in front, then a bit of fairground rock, but very demure bunting, and then that's the sort of proscenium arch. It's also, it's a remnants of, I was thinking just the John Denise Patenley curse, but that's sort of going off in another direction, and then also the top one could be controversial, but it wasn't intended to be, but it's just how it happened. It seems.
Thanks, Lynn.
And it was fun to do.
Good. Could you hear her? Could you hear Lynn? Yes. Sorry, let me just get this. So this is for our visitors here. This is Marta at the Cumberland Column.
You're like people in Birr are very tall.
Yes, like we're really tall. You didn't realise because you only ever see the top bit, but absolutely, this is what we're like. So this is like, so this festival, like Birr Vintage Week, this 53-year-old festival, and normally on Vintage Sunday there'd be a parade. We couldn't do that because of COVID, but we had these street theatre. We have vintage cars coming around, and that was Marta with the street theatre guys. All right, so I thought it was like Rick sent out an email yesterday saying, this is our Zoom, and just like, this is all these people are like at different times in the world, just showing this, like we're all here, but they're all at a completely different time. The whole exhibition outside that I hope you've all seen. And for our visitors, this is where we are. Our theatre is absolutely beautiful. So this is outside, this is our opening. We're all dressed up. And this is the exhibition. So it's displayed on, they're like, what are they called? Like fence panels. And the quality of the print is actually really beautiful. Like, I'm amazed at how well they're printed. And it's printed on a sort of plasticated thing so that it's completely waterproof. The day we were putting it up, it was really, really windy. I was really worried that it was all going to like fly off, and then we'd come back the next day and it would just be like collages all over the place. But it's been fine, it's staying up. And that's like people looking at it, and then I mean it is lovely to have something on the street because different people that might not come into the exhibition are coming by and seeing it. So I wondered, like, I was going to ask each of our visiting artists here to talk a little bit about their piece, but I wondered before we did that, if I might just ask Amanda and Brian to talk very briefly, otherwise I'll tell you to stop, about, your views on the exhibition. You don't have to talk about art, you can just talk about heritage.
From my point of view, as heritage officer in the council, I was involved back in 2009. We were very concerned about the column and its condition. So all my engagement was with the logistics of conservation reports, live water, the metal joints inside that was spawning and pushing out the stone, and we got scaffolding up. I was only when I got to the top that I remembered I was scared of heights. It was all wobbling around. I was terrified. I just kept saying, yes, everything looks great. I get back down again. We did a whole big conservation project, and I was really fixed on documenting it and securing it and conserving it, and very much the logistics. And then Creative Ireland it's a project that we're involved in the council for the last 4 or 5 years, and it encourages the heritage section, the art section, the library section, and communities to work together. And we've done a lot of projects that a lot of people in the audience here will have seen, and I just personally, I find it fantastic when you can work with artists to look at aspects of heritage. And I find that heritage people tend to use lectures, publications, reports, talks, tours, which are all very valid. But I find that when art is included, there's much more emotion maybe involved in it, and maybe there's different kind of depth of memory because you have a different experience. So when Caroline talked to me, I think I was talking to you about something else, and you just said, I've just had this really, exciting conversation, and you're talking about the whole beginning of the creation. I said, oh my goodness, this is just such an exciting project, because I think, forgive me, I forget whose bio said that it happens, of course, that we forget maybe what's in our streetscape. Now, you can't forget the column. Every time you drive in to the main square, it's there in front of you. But maybe there's an element of you're going to your shopping, you go to a meeting, you go to something else, and to really look at it through the eyes of all the artists, I just think it's absolutely wonderful. I think it's just really exciting that there's such a wide spectrum of artists who've been brought in. So I'm delighted to be here and to be hearing from the artists and to have the experience of it. So I think it's exactly what I suppose the Creative Ireland project is asking us to do, to just kind of get out of our little silos and start working together. So I think it's very exciting, and I have to say 100% to Caroline and Birr Vintage Week for the idea to put it together in the first place, and to everybody who's responded to it. I think it's fabulous. I don't live in the town of Birr, and Birr Historical Society would be a different reaction, but coming from County Council's conservation point of view, I think it's terribly exciting. I love it.
Thank you. And just to some background, once the group of artists had been selected by Ric, they then did a Zoom with Brian to really learn about the whole history of Birr, learn a bit about the context and the column itself. Do you want to say something, Brian?
Thanks, Caroline. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you for involving me in the project. I found it fascinating. I've spent a lifetime of dealing in facts, but sir, why? That's been my life. And I think it's great to look at people who have pure imagination and just leave their imagination soar to the sky. I was very impressed, I must say, with some of the biographies and some of the write-ups on the different posters outside, and some of the imagination that has been used And I think really, I suppose it was, I said it at the meeting that, you know, I was asked by one of the artists how significant it was, and you know, it's just always been there on your way to work or school every day. You don't really, I suppose, appreciate the beauty of the column or of much of the history of the town, really. I know myself, even as an historian, it's when I bring a tour around the town of people from other places that the true beauty of what's under my own nose becomes apparent. When they ask questions and when they ooh and ah when they're on the John's Place or somewhere about some of the buildings or the plots or whatever, and it's only then that you really truly appreciate what we have in front of us. And I think this exhibition has allowed us to appreciate the square. And I think for, you know, for everybody who's listening in tonight, just to put back into the context, I think how the square came about, we need to go back about 60 years prior to that, to 1690, to the rebellion. And just to remember that every successive generation, if you're talking about the Parsons family, there are 14 generations of them from 1620 to the present day, down to William, to the grandson of the Earl of Ross. There are 14 generations. And nearly every time, every alternate generation is a William or a Lawrence. So the present Earl is William Brendan, his son is Lawrence Patrick, and his son is William. So the tradition continues on. But the Lawrence Parsons, who was there in 1689, was deposed. Oxburgh and others went over with the rebels, and he was sentenced to death. He was a sentence which was commuted on a number of occasions, and he was jailed in the town jail. And this was his grandson, the Sir Lawrence, who built the column with Charnley with her cousin, the plans of which are still in the library of the castle. And they survived the fire, and they're still there. Lord Ross showed them to me just about 2 years ago. And just looking at that whole period when he designed the square, I'm sure it was still in the back of his head that these people are not to be trusted. It was only 60 years since his grandfather had been deposed. And when he came back into the estate, he only lived about a year. And the William who came after him spent his entire life trying to rebuild the castle, rebuild the estate. He had to really start from scratch. So, you know, the grandson there, the message, yes, the Rics mentioned that at the beginning of putting the Duke of Cumberland, who had defeated Bonnie Prince Charlie only a year earlier, on the monument. That was a clear indication of what could happen to you if you stepped out of line. And you can see where he's coming from. It was his grandfather. It was recent history in the family. And I suppose he probably felt a bit insecure himself. But the other thing about the square is it's still the centre of the town. And of course, the column was there until 1915, but the statue, when it was removed, it had become unsafe, and it was leaning towards the then police barracks, the Garda station today. He had gone over in that direction, he was leaning forward. And he was made of lead. And any of you, certainly the Irish people will realise anybody has a lead valley, they crack and they, you know, because of heat and frost, they crack and lead perishes. So he had perished in the 150 or more years he was up there. And he was removed by steeplejacks. The column is left idle, and as Amanda will tell you, it is not safe to put a statue on it. And I think it should be left that way when I see the wonderful inspiration that the vacancy has actually brought about this time as an historian. I think it's doing more maybe vacant for the imagination than if we put something on it. That's and congratulations to the artists. And thank you, Caroline.
Just a quick note to say, when we mentioned earlier on about the head, just to say the arm is in the library. You know, it's in Birr Library in a glass case. But I think the whole rest of it was long gone to scrap. The only bits we know of are the head, which is back in the Hunt Museum. It was on loan for a short period to Birr Castle, and it's back in the Hunt Museum. But the arm is still in a quiet corner of the library down the road in a glass case. It's very useful to see because it gives you an idea of the scale. You know, it's hard to get the scale otherwise.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think we might hear from our artists that are zooming in with us. So I have Ines. Would you like to talk a little bit about your piece? And I'm going to try and like center this a little bit better.
Yeah, of course. My name is Ines Al-Souki. I grew up in Kuwait, but I'm Palestinian and Romanian. And with that, you know, the idea of a monument is very complicated. If you look at the communist side of Romania and, you know, the non-existing Palestine, you know, the monument is a very important idea. And with that, when I was looking at, you know, what is Birr, my experience with Ireland was only Dublin, and it was the Immigration Museum, which is an incredible institution. And I just started looking for a figure in Birr that I could focus on. So I picked Catherine Mahon, and she was part of the women's suffrage, kind of turn of the century. And I was just imagining her trying to take over the column. So as you can see, she's like riding this kind of balloon, like the leftover of a balloon. And she's trying to get onto the column, and there's all these other figures trying to get to it. And then you have the townies in the foreground celebrating. And there's when we were learning about Birr, it was fascinating to learn of the different machines that were created by the family that lives there. So I created the different machines that might have been invented there or not, just kind of creating a little satirical representation of the collage. And also it's interesting with Ireland, there's a focus on wallpaper, these beautiful handmade wallpapers. So I had a book, and I chose this illustration of one of the wallpapers for the background. Yeah, that's my collage.
Thank you. And we're going to go next to Danielle in Canada.
Hi, thank you so much. You know, for me, first of all, thank you so much for including me, and I loved learning about your town and its history. And for me, I started by visualizing every statue I've ever seen, every public-facing statue, every older statue I've ever seen. And I reflected a great deal on the absences. There's a theory called symbolic annihilation, and this theory was coined in the 1970s, and it has to do with the rise of television and media. And symbolic annihilation is about the absence of representation. So it's the absence of diversity, it's the absence of women in leadership positions, it's the absence of minorities represented as a great or capable. And so I'm very interested in the absence. And so when I think about statues, if you're seeing women in statues, they are allegorical, or they're mythological, or they're saints. If they are real people, they're mothering or they're nurses. And so it's just not all that women can be. I really feel it's important when talking about gender equity and equal rights to have a sense of humor, because we actually all want equality. No one doesn't want equality in our hearts, I think. And so I wanted this to be joyous. And so I put all these women leaping off the column. And, you know, we exist in a moment of time, and they're leaping into the future, a future that has greater equity for female identified people. It's a little hard to see. I think it's scooched down on the slide, but I snuck in a little, what are they called in video games? Easter egg. I snuck in my mother-in-law, and I put her with she is from Dublin. She's twice immigrated, and she ended up in Canada. And when she was 5 or 6, it was raining, torrentially raining outside, and she snuck a lamb into her house. They lived on a rural property, and they caught her like pushing this lamb into the house so it wouldn't get wet. But also I know that Ireland is a very Christian space, and I wanted to put the lamb in to celebrate that as well, but also that she bears witness to all of the great changes that are already happening all the time for equality for all people. Thank you so much.
I apologize. I put this presentation together really quickly this morning. So there are a lot. Is Eliana here?
Yes, I am.
Great.
Hi, my name is Eliana, and I am so honored to be a part of this exhibition and a part of this group. It has been really interesting to learn about your town in Ireland. I've never been there. I had a cousin at some point who went to medical school there, but that's as far as that had been as far as my knowledge about Ireland until now, and I'm very honored to be a part of this. And I think a little bit of a background about me could start to unravel a little bit about what you're seeing in my piece, which I've called a thank you note to Birr. I'm from Iran. I grew up half of my life in Iran. I'm currently based back here again, and half of my life in America. And I'm also professionally trained as a landscape architect, which a lot of that goes into what Ric has talked about in terms of monuments and what they have meant in America, especially as an immigrant woman having lived in different political climates of America. There was a lot that I personally experienced. And one of the things that we always talked about in landscape architecture is can you collectively help reshape memory in terms of public spaces? And so when I learned that we could actually work with the empty column that was very central to the town of Birr, that was fascinating to me, because it was a lot of what I had struggled with in terms of professional work, and how do you do that and how do you explain that? And more importantly, growing up in Iran, I have grown up in an activist home. My mother has always been a women's rights activist professionally, and so I've traveled with her all over Iran, kind of helping women understand their own rights. And in the really great verbal history that we heard from Brian in one of our sessions, I learned one of the most fascinating things to me, which was the cane of eminent that came out from the town of Birr, which then became kind of the basis for the Declaration of Human Rights. And it essentially meant that during war, women and children were going to be safe from everybody else who was actually at war. And in light of everything that I had gone through in terms of women's rights in Iran at that time, and also in light of what's going on in Afghanistan currently, I think that that's such a significant part of the global identity that we can all have as human rights. And the fact that it started from the town of Birr, it was such a full circle moment for me personally. And so in here, you basically see two things, I think. And those are what I am super appreciative for the town of Birr for. And number one is what I just explained. And for women's rights, which, now we can kind of see all the movements that are happening, and we're all very grateful for the fact that this conversation actually started in your town. So thank you for that. And also the fact that I think the world of astrology has a lot to thank the town of Birr for, especially because you had the largest telescope for a very long time. And I think, just kind of seeing that and seeing how a town that I may have seen at some point in my life, has become such a big part of my life for the past few months, and I'm very grateful for that. So this is a thank you note to Birr. Thank you for all of your contribution to the global humanism and just helping us become better as citizens of the world.
Thanks, Eliana. We actually did, there's a project, we've shown a couple of years during the festival that is celebrating that. I can never pronounce it, Corner and because it's just such an important thing.
Absolutely, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And we're going to go to Ashley in
in Ohio. Great. Well, I hope you all are having a terrific vintage week. It's now on the top of my, what do they call it, bucket list to come see Birr. And I just want to echo what people have said, is how much I've enjoyed the process of learning about Birr and its heritage, and also how much I've enjoyed this process. So Carolyn, Brian, of course, Ric, thank you so much for allowing me to join the group, and also to fellow artists. I was really so inspired by our initial conversation, and I'm enjoying so much this, this presentation and seeing what people have come up with. So I am a philosopher by training, and I suppose by disposition, as well as a collage artist. And so really my approach was thinking about the challenge and meaning of filling in an empty column. And so the challenge is the way that it was framed reminded me a bit of Hegelian and Lacanian philosophy. And I will make this as simple as I can. The premise is basically that human subjects, we are projections, sort of from the Latin, the jacare, which is like a projection out. And we do this in an attempt to give a kind of stability to our experience and to make meaning. We must do this because, according to this, both I think Hegel and Lacan, the subject or the reality itself perhaps is meaningless, but we don't have access to know. It is unrepresentable to us. And why I mentioned Hegel here too is that we are driven by desire, the desire to make meaning. And so my response was basically to create this graph that was borrowed from this philosopher, psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, that showed the very structure of desire, which is never completed. We always, and we know from, I think most of us, this experience where one day we might want one thing and feel a moment, if we're lucky, of satisfaction, only to want the next version of it or the next thing or a whole another thing to complete us. And so my series of collages, because I couldn't stop, and in fact, I'm probably going to make another one tonight.
Stop. And I just want to move you out of that because you're blocking your where we go. We'll put you up here for a minute. You were the ad.
Yeah. So yeah, these are just variations on that basic concept. And so the one your ad here is just the way that society is also constructed to exploit this human condition of needing this sense of completeness. And so we become so vulnerable to, you know, just whatever the thing du jour is. The butterfly one is more in the direction, though, of the sort of shared humanity of this condition. For Lacan, this is very dark. There's no ultimate completion, right? It is always going to be unrepresentable to ourselves. But I think that as a philosopher, what I love to see is if we can pause in our compulsion to always want to complete something or to put our icon on the top, that this might give, this is a hopeful moment. And if we can embrace just or acknowledge that no one of us has the ultimate answer or history, that might be, have some healing, or, you know, the butterfly is always the symbol of transformation, that maybe there's hope for us yet. I don't know. So anyway, thank you again.
Thank you. And we're going to go to England now. And Mark.
Hi, thanks for having me. Thanks to Ric for inviting me to be part of this project. It's been really interesting. I'm the eldest son of two people that were born in Northern Ireland that came to live in Birmingham in the early 70s. And yeah, so it's kind of, this is the second time that I've shown work in Ireland, so it's a really nice opportunity to do that. My piece is called A Monument for the Many. I really enjoyed Ric's writing about the column, and it kind of, yeah, sort of got me thinking about how columns often sort of celebrate the idea of an exceptional individual, and how ultimately that is flawed, because the world is many people, not just, you know, it's not just great singular people. So I kind of found the whole idea of the emptiness kind of interesting at the top. I went to art school in Bristol, so there's been Bristol's another place where a statue's been kind of toppled recently. Colston. The idea for my piece was that the emptiness, the empty space at the top becomes a place that could be visited by people, so it could be accessed by people to gain a new or elevated view. And kind of so yeah, there was an idea at the end of the essay. One of the things that Brian told us about was the McGreagle Gospel, which is from Birr, and it's this really, like, when I started to research that, I was kind of blown away, because at the time when I began to make collage again, say 10 years or so ago, I also tried to teach myself calligraphy, so I was actually blown away by the beauty of those McGreagle Gospels. So the obscured figure in my text, I'd said the obscured figure at work could suggest the young architect Samuel Chiernley, or even the gifted abbot whose magnificent illuminated McGreagle Gospel, created almost 1,000 years earlier, is also associated with Birr. The collage section suggests an ascent to the tip of the column, and the emptiness is a space of contemplation. How do we learn from the mistakes of the past and move into the future together, navigating the many challenges we face collectively with compassion and dignity? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to talk about yours, Rick?
Sure. Really briefly, I made this really when I was writing the essay and wanting to kind of explore the feasibility of the concept. So it's a pretty simple collage in some ways. There's the original photograph of the square. And then I just love this image. It's the boys are, it's Kashin Singh. He's the Maharaj of Bharatpur, who lived like 1899 to like 1829. And but I love him kind of, this little boy kind of wearing all this heavy jewelry and clothing, and kind of weighed down by the weight of his own history. You know, he became, you know, came to power as this kind of young boy and had to kind of take on the world, take on this very heavy, bejeweled thing. And that for me felt like some of the burden that we are given by history. You know, we must carry history with us. It's part of the human condition. And sometimes that history is light and airy, and sometimes it's a bejeweled burden. And so I was kind of imagining him as kind of conjuring this this monument to artists, this monument to collage artists, this collection of scissors. And I chose scissors because doing a similar kind of constellation with splatterings of glue is very messy. And I thought scissors were much prettier and much more ornamental. So that's really the gesture behind it. Wanting to make sure I could, if I was going to ask a bunch of collage artists to do something, make sure I could do it myself. And that's it. Yeah.
I mean, I just think it's amazing that we have had like all these artists around the world are just looking at Birr and learning about like this tiny town in the middle of Ireland. It is, of course, very special. But you've got all these people looking in and learning about it and responding to it. We had, Marta did a really fabulous collage workshop this afternoon. And it was like, we did have local people, but we also had another lovely group of collage artists from other parts of Ireland who have come down, gone out for a meal, are staying the night, are looking at our town again. And it's just like fantastic, all these people like looking in on us. And I just wondered if anybody has any questions that they'd like to put.
I have a question.
Do we have any questions? Or do you have any questions? It's funny because I'm turning around. I'm talking to you up there, and you're there. It's really, really confusing. I keep talking around and just seeing the back of myself. Do you have any questions or anything that you'd like to say other than just about your specific collage?
Well, I will just add, I reinforce what I had said earlier this evening. I am very interested in what the people of Birr think about this column, and so I encourage folks to email me, get in touch with Caroline, spread the word a little bit, because I do think it's, you know, we come from the outside, and this is where artists are good, because I think artists can shake up things that, you know, as Brian said, the column is just something you go past all the time. And I think in each of our own communities, there are things that we don't pay attention to or see. And then, you know, you have a house guest come to town for the weekend, and all of a sudden they're paying attention to things that you wouldn't have otherwise, or finding them interesting. And so with the Birr column, I felt like that's our job as artists, is to go around and point at things and draw big red circles around them and make it to do. But what I also often hope we leave people with is that kind of sense of imagination and curiosity. And so I'm just very curious to know, like, what people think and what people think of their town, and what they would imagine on the top of that column, and recognizing that it doesn't have to be a 500-pound lead statue. It can be an idea, you know, and that might change from day to day. Yeah.
I took some photos. It's not possible right now, but somebody put brownie instead of the column. So.
Oh yes.
But it was.
Yeah, we had. Yes, yes, we had, like, Martin's workshop was really fantastic this afternoon, and we had some more reinterpretations of the column.
Yeah. It was interesting as well. I think Yvonne had noticed that the date on the bottom of the photograph was the same as the Battle of Trafalgar? Yeah. So there was a really interesting piece including Lord Nelson, who actually had a column also in Dublin, which was famously blown up. So yeah, it was interesting to see these links being made as well in history. That came about during the workshop too. You know, there's some good pieces there.
I heard a rumor, and I don't know if this is true or not, Brian, whether you can. I heard that the only reason that it was the Duke of Cumberland was because he was cheap.
They said that the statues were mass produced, but as far as we can reckon, he was commissioned.
Yeah, it seems weird that you'd make a pile of Duke of Cumberlands.
You could look at the bottom and see if it's made in China. Look, where's his foot?
Part of it's on the monument, isn't it? So, yeah.
Oh, is it? His foot's still up there.
It sticks out.
So that's still a monument.
You know, I think I suggested at the workshop today that maybe we dig a little pit and put these people at a slightly lower position to the rest of the general public, you know, but also to keep them in sight and to understand what is it about our society, or what is it about these things in the past that have happened that we don't like. Not just celebrating the virtue, but keep them really in our mind's eye and in our imagination. The elements that, you know, just don't sit with us. Instead of sweeping them away, hiding them away, because that's not going to get us anywhere either. I don't.
Enough? So I'd just like to say thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of the artists being involved. Thank you so much to Ric, who made this all possible and assembled this amazing group, and to Brian for introducing them all to the history and giving this context around it. And it's been just an amazing journey. I've really, really enjoyed it. It's been a bit tiring.
And thank you too.
Yeah, Caroline.
So thank you. And thank you. And I don't know, is it good night, good morning, good afternoon to everybody?
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
So bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Take care.